Hey yo, everyone, gather round. It's story time. Brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Department of Social Work, and the Conscious Party Productions. You are listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast.
A conscious party.
Revolutionizing our minds.
Elevating our consciousness.
Changing our worlds.
Your story.
My story.
Our story.
All right. Welcome to another episode of The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. I'm your host, Christian Ace Stettler, and I am very pleased to be joined this morning by Miss Ana Joanes. Did I say that right? All right. How are you this morning?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, well, we're going to get into a whole host of things. And we're going to talk about your most recent documentary, Wrestling Ghosts, in a little bit. But I thought we could get to know you just a little bit, and we might as well situate ourselves. So as all of you know, I'm in Alaska. I'm in the town of Girdwood, which is down on the southern coast of Alaska, just a little bit east of the main city of Anchorage. But we're definitely heading into fall. When you're walking around here, there's snow crunch. I mean, not snow, but the leaves are crunching under you. I couldn't see the neighbors a couple weeks ago, but now I can see them because all the leaves are falling off. Snow on the top of the mountains, so it's going to be here before we know it. How's it over in New York? Have you moved into fall, or is it still summer weather?
Oh yeah, no, we're in fall. It's leaf turning season. It's the most beautiful time of the year in terms of, the visuals of all the colors. The top of the trees right now are getting red and yellow and orange, and soon the full trees will be, but now they all have crowns. It's really beautiful, yeah.
Yeah, and it's beautiful here too. Anchorage, like I said, the main city is about 45 minutes down the highway, but it's beautiful because you have the ocean on one side and the Kenai Peninsula across the ocean, and then on the right-hand side you have, all the mountains and the red and yellow and orange trees. So it's like an amazing time of year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Alaska
all right.
is just perfectly gorgeous. I said Alaska is incredibly gorgeous.
Yeah. Have you been here before?
I've been here. Yeah, I visited once, and I hope I can visit again with my children one day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, all right. Well, you've been making a bunch of relevant documentary films to revolutionary social work and social work in general. Tell us a little bit about your history. How'd you get into documentary filmmaking, and maybe even more specifically, in the realm of the topics of your documentaries, are very social work oriented, very conscious of, mindful living, everywhere from what we're eating to trauma. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and how did you get into all that?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's basically the summary of your podcast. It's storytelling for the purpose of transformation. And I was in law school and I love studying, so it was super interesting to study the world and study society. And I was very fortunate to study under the people who are the forefront of critical race theory in this country. Poorly named studies, but incredibly interesting. And so I learned tremendously. But the more I learn about the way the law transforms society, the more disillusioned I was, and the less I wanted to. I mean, it's important work. It has to be done. I'm not, I didn't feel like it was the right place for me. I didn't want to work in the trenches like some of my friends, like as a public defender, for instance. But I also didn't want to do, like you look at really important, work like Brown versus Board of Education, which, desegregated schools in the U.S. In a really dramatic and traumatic way for a lot of students, right? Which were bused and forced to enter schools that were not welcoming to them. We also that picture of the little girl, that's being brought into a school with like picketers, like this little 5-year-old girl entering a school with all this violence against her. And then, decades later, the New York City schools are more segregated than ever. And then you wonder, all that work, all that suffering, for what? If you don't change a culture, if you don't change perception, you can't truly, I think, make an impact. And my interest was really around incarceration. And I was looking, it was during New York City, during the reign of, three strikes, you're out, broken windows theory, all of these kind of like law and order. We're going to fix the city and fix the crime by cracking down on Black people, mostly. And what that looked like is a lot of Black kids getting caught in the criminal justice system. And, the more I learned, the more I wanted to share. And when I shared, I really hit two kinds of reaction. One was folks who agreed with me, but treated this very much like numbers, a problem, not something that urgently needed to be changed, because these were not people that they knew, that they loved, that were affected. And the other ones were people that were reactive and felt like I was accusing them of racism or individual racism, instead of understanding what systemic racism is and looks like. And then I was exposed to this woman, this organization, this movie, and it was like one of those aha moment, right, that you have when you just like something clicks and you're just like, this is it. And I thought, like you got to change the narrative. As a social worker, like we are our stories, right, on a individual level, like what you tell yourself, what you repeat to yourself, what you've learned about yourself, your even family stories, how we understand our own family history. All of these stories become our reality. They become how we process, how we filter who we are. And as a culture, we are, our stories are as well, right? We are a meritocracy. We are a democracy. We are, like money is worth, like this credit card is worth money, like really, is it? Like, how do we, just because we have to collectively believe that for it to uphold itself, right? For it to work. So if you change the stories, I hope then you can perhaps change how we live. And in Wrestling Ghosts, the main story shift that I'd like to participate in creating is one from blame and judgment to punishment, right? To compassion, understanding, and, transformation. A very radical difference, very radical shift. And we definitely live in a culture of blame and punishment from our court system, but also with our children, with each other, towards ourselves. Even things that we do kind of, New Year's resolution have a weird kind of punishment aspect to it instead of celebration and acceptance and, etc.
Yeah, we're weighed down and burdened by so many things as human beings that are kind of unnecessary. But you mentioned the other documentary about incarceration, and then thinking about the most recent one, Wrestling Ghosts. I see parallels there, and I can't remember who said it in the film, but I think somebody's talking about. I think what's the main character in the Wrestling Ghost? The woman, what's her name?
Kim.
Yeah. So I think it was somebody talking to Kim, and they were saying, if you broke your leg, folks wouldn't expect you to put all your weight on your leg and walk around and act like nothing is normal. And I see, that somebody that's walking around with a broken heart, I think that's the word they use, right? A broken heart. Somebody's walking around with a broken heart, but we're not so forgiving. And we hold people to such high standards and hold them so accountable when, sometimes life is just hard and we're just trying to figure it out. But the reason I see it tied into incarceration is because I've done a lot of work in this area as well. And when I usually talk to folks about people that are incarcerated, they run the other direction. They don't want anything to do with it. Even people that kind of like have the guys that they're interested in such things, they run the other direction. And to the largest degree. And so then I see when we talk about traumatized children or traumatized adults that were traumatized as children, walking around with trauma, we're not so forgiving to them either. And we have this culture, this like kind of neoliberal culture of, you're responsible for yourself, individualization of it. Right. But do you see those parallels when you're making those different kinds of films?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I didn't make a film about incarceration, but
I thought you did. I'm sorry.
100% see a direct line between the way we treat children and the way we treat, the way we judge people for their, criminal act or for their behavior. And I mean, that is such a complicated topic, but the, I just lost my train of thought. You said something about, oh, yeah. So, I remember somebody sharing with me one time, and I thought it was really insightful. Like with the little children, we assume their innocence, right? So when you have a baby, no matter what they do, for most people, not everyone, because some people assign even intent on a very little baby. Oh, she's a good baby. She's a bad baby. Like, don't respond to the crying because they'll learn to manipulate. Sometimes people even assign intent and negative intent to babies, but mostly we see babies as being innocent. We see very young children as being innocent. And then at some point, we start assigning intent to children. And often, we have stories about what they're doing. Oh, that child is clearly manipulating you, or they're going to try to get away, or they're lying, like a lot of negative intent. And as the child gets older and clearly into adulthood, by then we tend to interpret behavior as being very intentional and negative, and we have a lot of blame and judgment about how people behave. The science of trauma shows very well how trauma affects a child's capacity to listen, to sit still, to process emotion, to regulate emotion, all of the things that often we end up telling a child, like, we've been telling you all this time, stay still, to stop touching the child next to you, to not scream, to, why can't you do it? And the child is like, I really want to. So now something is wrong with me. And then you kind of, process all of this shame, this what's wrong with me, messaging. But these kids are probably trying their best. And instead of having this belief that they're doing their best, so what's going on? How can we support? We start assigning what's wrong with you feelings about it. But I think that what the tension is between understanding and having context, and therefore compassion. Because if we have understanding and context, we tend to be able to have compassion, but also accountability. Because clearly, if we're going to live with each other, we got to assign accountability. There has to be a place where people say, there's so many people in prison who have committed crimes, real crimes, when they were still teens, when they were 17, 18, 19, maybe 21, difficult life, bad circumstances, unlucky, whatever. But they mostly take accountability for it. Just like, I was a stupid kid, I made this mistake. And then sometimes they stop for decades in prison. So they need to take accountability. We do need people to be like, I've done this, yes, maybe I have this excuse or that explanation or whatever, but at the end of the day, I did this. I need to make amends. I need to figure out how to heal myself and fix what I've done. But it doesn't mean that we can't understand the context and then support people to, to access what they can access, and to, like to have a belief in redemption, basically, that people can have redemption and start over and have a second chance. And you can only really believe that if you have capacity for compassion, forgiveness, and again, understanding of the context, that everybody does not get the same opportunities, the same start in life, and that can affect you for your whole life.
Yeah, it makes me think, when I did my undergraduate practicum internship, I was placed at working with domestic violence offenders. And, I go in there and, I'm still just an undergraduate student, and I was the only male there as well. So they end up putting me with the heart, I don't know the right word to use, but the hardest of the men in there. And so I'm going in there and I'm thinking, these guys are not going to want to talk to me, right? They're not going to want to talk to this, social work student that's in here, whatever. And the reality was, I couldn't have been further from the truth. And what I learned from those men was that, yeah, they'd committed many of them, it was hard to read through their files and whatnot and read the acts that they had done. And so they needed to be held accountable and know that that's not acceptable to harm other people, regardless of what happened to you. But what I also learned was that each one of those men had a story, and that story contained like loads and loads of abuse as a child. And so they had their own story, but rather than anybody ever really listening to their story, they were put in a cell, a dark, cold cell somewhere, in jail, prison. And I've been to jail before, and I know for a fact, and I've worked with lots of people that are in jail and prison, and they don't listen to you when you're in jail. You're treated like, you don't have any voice. It's like less than a voice, like less than zero. And so how are we to expect somebody to heal if they've been traumatized and abused themselves? And then we're only holding them accountable for their actions, but we're not empathizing with what actually happened to them or letting their story
Yeah.
come out in order for them to heal, right?
Yeah. No, it's trauma upon trauma upon trauma. It's really the saddest, the most tragic thing is that the children that have been the most traumatized, end up in adult life getting the most trauma, and it's sometimes inflicting, but not always. I mean, some people in jail have not inflicted violence on others, but they are in jails for other reason. But their life is ongoing trauma because of that early age trauma, and it is heartbreaking and tragic because there are alternatives way to do it. And I think that the purpose of my documentary, we tend to focus when we talk about these things, we tend to focus on others, and often, especially in the social work field, right? You have all these people coming into social work, psychology, nursing, the helping fields, education, and people that are driven with in their heart the desire to be of support to others. And so we tend to focus on people who have suffered a great deal, and probably a great deal more than we have. Not for everyone, right? Some people come into the field with very high level of trauma, but to an extent we tend to focus and discuss the others, the folks who are in jail, which are not us, the folks who are the abuser or the victim of severe abuse, right? The folks who are living in poverty and hopelessness. So we focus on the others. And I think that there is a tendency to even though we're doing it from a place of compassion, it is still othering and it is still disconnecting, because there's us and there's them. And I think that at the end of the day, this is the opposite of what I think will truly make a difference. What will truly make a difference, I think, is and which is why my documentary is quite slow and gives you a chance to really take your time and to spend time kind of like assessing your own trauma, because most of us have experienced trauma. A lot of it is invisible. We don't even consider it trauma. We'll think, oh no, my childhood was okay, right? Compared to these people, my childhood was a dream, right? Maybe you were sufficiently safe and sufficiently competently raised that you are now a social worker, right? You're not in jail. So like in some ways, clearly things went well. And so we tend to underestimate or undermine our own trauma. And so to spend time understanding the ways that we've been hurt and having compassion for ourselves and understanding the impact that it's had on ourselves. Because even though you might seem competent from the outside, and you know that, I'm guessing, Christian, well, from your work, you might not be doing well so much in the inside. You might have addictive behavior. You might have very hard time building or maintaining relationship, not just romantic, but any kind of relationship. You might be dealing with like deep level self-loathing. You might be having, eating disorders that are not visible to the outside world. There might be so much internal suffering that, can create chronic issues in your life that might not be visible. On the outside, you might seem to be functioning enough or well enough. And so spending some, and most of us are very harsh on ourselves. And if we're out there helping others, we also are comparing ourselves and thinking, what's wrong with me? Why can't I be better? Because look at what this person had to deal with. And so when we focus on ourselves and our own trauma and developing a compassionate inner voice towards ourselves, then it naturally expands to other. And of course, compassion goes both ways. If I grow my compassions for the other, sometimes it flows back and allows me to have more compassion for myself. But I think it goes more easily the other way. So, if I develop compassion for myself, then that naturally expands to others, and I'm gonna have more ease, and I'll think less of them as others. I'll just think of them as, other humans who are also suffering and doing the best they can, the same way I'm doing the best I can, and I come short a lot. And then I try to reconnect and repair.
Yeah, yeah. And I hear a couple things in there. One is this sense of, instead of it being your story and my story, let's change it so it's our story together. to connect our stories. So I think then that's a lot of, when you look at a lot of the problems we have in the world, whether it's addiction or, other things going on, a lot of that results from disconnection, right? We're not feeling connected to ourselves. We're not feeling connected spiritually. We're not feeling connected to the community. So I like the idea of connecting. And then I really appreciate everything else that you're talking about, because I feel like the words that are coming out of your mouth are literally encapsulating what revolutionary social work is. And that is, what I hear you saying is that, we often want to change the world, or we want to change different things, but really it starts inside of ourselves. And if we focus on ourselves and we change those things and improve ourselves and put ourselves on on a different trajectory, then just by virtue of that, we're going to give permission for others to do the same. We're going to be more likely to show other people. I think it works both ways. If you show other people compassion, you're more likely to show yourself. But the same way, if you show yourself compassion, you're more likely to be
Right.
kinder to other folks as well, right?
Absolutely. And I think that, back to the revolutionary social work, again, I think like closing that gap between me and the other, us and the others,
Yeah.
it changes your approach to your clients or the community you work with. Because I think that the realm of experts coming down and, telling communities what's best for them, or telling individual what they need and what's best for them, it just doesn't work, right? It's just short-sighted and often um m- m- at the counterproductive, or maybe in the worst case like harmful. And communities, like when I have talked to people in you know survivor communities, they ongoingly say, we are the best experts, don't tell us what we need. Same with survivors of cancer or cancer patients. Like, again, the feeling of not being heard, of not being empowered. And the same way, when I look at education for my children, I want to be them to be in with teachers and institutions that are strength focused and not deficiency focused. The same way, when I look at myself and I'm maybe overwhelmed by my flaws or the things that I'm coming short, it's good for myself to shift and look at, well, what are my strengths? What am I doing right? How can I grow my competency, my resiliency? How can I lean into these things versus like fixing, doing better? The same way, then, when you work with communities or individual, you can ask those questions. Well, what are your strengths? What do you want to do? What do you think are the solutions? Because we often think we have solutions for others, but we really don't. And I think communities, underserved communities, historically, are being told how to help themselves instead of just being given the resources to do what they know they need to do. From children services to to crime, dealing with crime, right? Like, there are small programs to deal with crime in alternative way than in the court system, usually for nonviolent crimes. But there could be so much more that's done that gives the community a chance to make their own decision about how they want to handle and support themselves and bring about change. And most of the time it's just related to resources, which
Mhm.
that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, and I think, as a professor of social work, many students that come into social work, it's hard to teach them practice skills because they want to save everything and do everything in the first 20-minute set practice session, if that makes sense. And I thought you did a really good job of, so in my practice class right now, and any of you that are tuning in from the practice class, Anna did a really good job at almost describing solution-focused interviewing. So turning a problem into something positive, looking at the positive aspects of it, looking for exceptions, you know what I'm saying? Exceptions when you did better, when it wasn't so good. So trying to find the strengths, just trying to basically turn a problem statement into something that can be led to as a positive or even a solution. And again, one of the number one mistakes that students often make, and I think professional social workers obviously make this too, but thinking that you're the problem solver, or the one to fix it, or the one to provide the solutions, when in reality, every single person or every community or group that you work with has all of those things inside of them. And it's a matter of creating the space, maybe helping them educate themselves a little bit, offering tools, and really, but it's allowing for the other person to solve their own problems. You know what I mean?
Right.
We're not the
And
problem
that
solvers.
comes right. And that comes from, again, it's like, a capacity to accept someone fully, to not I think one of the often the approach that to me is the most, like in my own experience with therapists, there's a lot of therapist social worker that are fixers, because this is, again, like, it comes from a very beautiful place. It kind of, to me, reproduced a sense of like, I need to be fixed, and now you're just giving me a bunch of solutions, when what I really need is to be seen, right? We all just need to be seen, and to be in a space where we can be seen fully in all of our mess, right? And still be cared for, because that's how we need to see ourselves. We need to be able to see our full self with all of our mess, and still be, in acceptance, because it's from that we can actually access change, and that we can develop skills. Like, of course, the therapist, the social worker can still teach you some skills, reframing, focusing on the positive, some really practical skills, whether it's behavioral therapy or accessing resources, whatever. Like, those are still things that you can get from a therapist. But I think it needs to grow from a place of like, I'm just going to witness you, and just, like, that's it. Just witness you, see you for who you are, without needing to fix you. I don't want to fix you, It's a very different energy to, like, not want to fix, somebody, but just support them in, developing, their strengths and skills, etc. Right?
Mhm. Yeah. I appreciate that. Well, let's talk a little bit about let's dive in a little deeper into the documentary, Wrestling Ghosts. And just, it's available on Canopy if you're connected to a library or an institution. But where else would they find it if they don't have access to Canopy?
So for home rental, you can find it on my website, wrestlingGhosts.com, and then on my distribution collective, which is New Day Films. There is other licensing options for universities that don't have Canopy.
Okay, great. Yeah, so check out the film, especially if you're in one of my classes. You got the links, but just log in through your University of Alaska account and you can watch it if you haven't already on Canopy. And I wanted to start off interestingly, at the end of the film, there was I think you gave a shout out, a thank you to, is it Inbal
Inbal
Kashtan? Is that how you say
Kashtan.
it? Inbal Kashtan. Got it. So it says, in memory of who saw raising children as social change, who saw raising children as social change work, building the possibility, creating a more peaceful and just society. And the reason that really resonated with me was that I'm a parent. I have 3 young children at this point. And, being a social work professor and involved in all these areas, oftentimes we don't value children, and we look at them as oftentimes a burden. When you talk about somebody, say a young mother getting pregnant, we look at it as a burden, somebody that's going to weigh them down, not allow them to finish school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When we look at children in, like, when we're adults in the workforce, not too long ago, almost all children didn't go to daycare and weren't raised by somebody, didn't even have to pay somebody else to raise the young children. But today it's so hard, right? Oftentimes both parents have to work to support the family. And so by essence, the kids got to go to daycare. I think when we talk about social change and whatnot, this is not taken away from anything anybody else does, but, there's one side of it where you can go marching and do this and that. But there's a whole other side of it that I feel is overlooked oftentimes in the work that we can do within our own families and creating a better future generation. We often look just I know it's good to be in the present in most ways, but sometimes, it's helpful to look down the road and wonder, what kind of world are our kids going to live in? What kind of human beings are our children going to be? And if we can't make that commitment, in the United States of America, one of the most prosperous countries to ever exist, as far as economically and materially, if we can't raise each and every children with the full confidence that we can raise them into exactly who their highest potential of who they might become, in my perspective, we're not doing it right. And I think that if we shifted our focus somewhat culturally in the United States of America and beyond, but to more of this sense of valuing children and recognizing that if we were to put our effort there, then we would see those results down the road. But for some reason, we're so short-sighted here in so many ways. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. No, 100%. I mean, forget wanting the best for human beings and for these children, like just on an economic model. The studies have been out since the 1980s that childhood trauma, is an epidemic and causes, millions of dollars of, in productivity loss and medical costs, for us as a country. People in jail, people in mental hospital, people on disability, people, like all of that is 100%. I mean, I don't know the number. It is highly correlated with childhood trauma. The highest correlation, cancer, heart disease, not just mental health. Of course, you're an alcoholic. There might be, you're suffering, suicidal. You can imagine a mental health issue being correlated to childhood trauma. But it's every single illness in society is highly correlated, and some of them, like autoimmune disease for women, 20%. Severe autoimmune disease for women, 20% correlation with childhood trauma, with a score of 4 or over in the ACEs score, which, we can discuss a little bit if you'd like. Anyways, so we're talking about how what happens to you in childhood is going to impact your lifetime health and productivity, since that's really important in this country, and could save us, millions of dollars, if not more, in, homelessness, mental health, medical health, lost productivity. I mean, there is all the incentive in the world to do this right. And yet there is almost no family support in this country. In some countries, you have a 1 year, guaranteed leave of absence to be with your child. And it can be shared between both parents, not just, mother. This first year of life, most important scientifically for the development of the brain, safe attachment, well-being for a lifetime, so other countries provide a full year of leave of absence. Instead, children here, often we don't have extended family, we don't have financial capacity to take the year off. We have sometimes no more than 2 weeks before a woman has to go back to work. Her body is not even healed. Her child has not even properly latched sometime. I mean, we're talking about, literally cruelty. It's cruelty. I'm supporting women choosing to go back to work, but it should be fully a choice. So otherwise, it is cruelty, and it's cruelty towards the child and the mother, but the child, right? And the consequences, again, we're talking about lifetime consequences that affect the whole society. So we don't have the policies in place. I mean, obviously, we don't have healthcare, we don't have support for mental health, or we don't have childcare available freely for families that don't have the capacity to stay at home, or an extended family to stay at home. And so families are struggling sometimes with multiple jobs, and then choosing childcare that might not be ideal for their child just because that's what they can afford. So as a society, we don't value children. I mean, we don't pay teacher what they should be paid, right? We don't value teacher. This is a sign, right? If teachers are not a respected profession where they're paid properly, childcare worker, I mean, the little ones, they're paid terribly, probably worse than a housekeeper, and I value my housekeeper tremendously. I pay her well when she comes, I'm like, yay. So again, like, what do we care about, and how do we treat people? I think 100% this society doesn't care about children, but also clearly does not care about its own economic well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And my documentary does not focus on that, because I think sometimes, for me, when I look at societal issue, I get overwhelmed, and I'm like, this is not going to happen anytime soon. And I still want to feel like for my own children and for my own lifetime, there is a possibility of change. It's not to say that those systemic change should not happen. It's just to say that we also need some hope for our own self. And childhood trauma is cyclical. So it is passed down generation after generation. If you have dealt with childhood trauma, if your attachment is not secure, very likely you will pass down childhood trauma, and you will pass down an insecure attachment. The studies are there to prove it. And you might really want to. You might want to do everything right. And then you might feel so incredibly guilty, so shameful, that despite your best intention, here I am passing down that stuff. How come? I've worked so hard. I tried so hard. I was so intentional. And here I am passing down that stuff. How? How does it work? Well, it works because it works through your nervous system. And it works through things that you are not even necessarily aware of. And so, the beauty of this is as you heal yourself, you also break the cycle. And you might not break it in one generation. This is also part of like the forgiveness that you can give yourself. you are going to pass down some stuff. And some of the trauma is epigenetic. So you've passed it down even before you touch your children, right? Before you do anything wrong, that child already has the epigenetics of the trauma that is generational. So it could be from, all kinds of trauma that has happened for generation, from slavery to, pogroms, to all kinds of things that has happened to most cultures. So you can't take that on as you're going to break the cycle all by yourself. But you can certainly do some of the work. And as you heal yourself, even if your kids are older and you've already seen the ways that you are impacting them, or that the cycle of trauma is impacting them, as you heal, they are witnessing the healing, they are building resilience, and you are able to do some of the repair, and again, like, that's the best, it is the best we can do, right? We can't be where we're not yet.
Yeah. And what reminded me of the main character was named Kim.
Kim.
Yeah. So I empathized with Kim, and I saw myself in Kim, even when I looked into her eyes and the things that she was struggling with. I saw myself there. And I didn't have by any means, I didn't have an absolutely terrible childhood, but I had a lot of things that went down and a lot of experiences that stuck with me well into adulthood until I became into a parent. And here I was here in not that long ago, and I'm a college professor. I've got a beautiful wife. I've got beautiful children. Things if I were to go back, that I would be like, if you were to tell my past self, he'd have been thrilled, right? It'd been like, oh man, you got it made. I can't wait till I get there. But then I'm sitting here in my house, waking up in the morning or something, and I'm got something that worked, stressing me out, and I have found myself speaking to my children or reacting to my children the same way that was done to me in certain situations. And I found this, a profound sense of unhappiness and a burden and weighing down on me. And I dealt with this I dealt with it my whole life. But so my oldest kid is about to turn 8 at the start of the new year. And, I start to kind of re-experience things, and these things come back to me from childhood. And at first they weighed me down even more. And I'd be upset that I'd be ashamed of the way I reacted in a certain parenting situation. And I'd be thinking about my childhood and about, things like parenting and other things. And I was upset about it. And if I looked into my eyes, I saw that same thing in Kim, this sense of like guilt and weight and unhappiness. And it's reflecting into me being a parent, which I want to be the best parent in the world. But for some reason, or not for some reason, for, reasons that are obvious when you really look at them closely, I was feeling all sorts of ways. And to make a long story short, I tried all sorts of things, and I wanted to do all these things. And ultimately, what I ended up doing is, through a little bit of therapy and through a ton of self-reflection and whatnot, is I ended up letting it go. And it was very, very hard to do. It was like I was gripping it so tight, like I just couldn't let it go. It was just such a part of me. And then, when I finally one day it kind of clicked for me, and it was more of a subtle, gradual thing versus an aha moment. But like when and I was kind of like, well, I'm holding on to all these things that bothered me as a little boy, and it's plaguing me, or it's weighing me down here in the present, but it doesn't reflect my reality. And slowly and that stuff started to unravel, if that makes sense, and it's gone. And it's not like it. Sometimes I misdescribe it as like it never happened, but that's not true. It's not like things never happened. It's just like I switched it from that problem to a solution, as in no longer is it a burden that I'm no longer a wounded boy, but instead I'm a grown man who's overcome, or I shouldn't say who has overcome, but is continuously overcoming and growing through those wounds, and using it as something to build strength off of versus a deficit. You know what I mean? And
it's
that's the.
Sorry, your process makes me think of consolidation therapy. Have you heard of consolidation therapy? It's a process by which you do this kind of intensive self-reflection, and you can do it with the help of a therapist or journaling, or, there's tons of wonderful books and videos online. But the idea is to look at schemas, belief systems. So, things that happened to you as a child that has created beliefs that are just like a whole emotional, neurological reaction. It's it's you inhabit them, they inhabit you. So it could be like, one example in the book is this boy whose dad was really arrogant and he hated his dad. And he felt that every time he spoke up and had confidence, he had this belief that would just pop up from that not even consciously, that he's just like, people are going to think I'm an asshole, right? People are going to hate me because I'm being arrogant. And so the first step was to make that visible. This is what I'm doing. Oh, this is what I'm thinking. Oh, wow, this is what I believe. Often people will discover what the belief is and they will be like, that's a ridiculous belief. Obviously, I'm safe now. Obviously, people like me, or obviously it's okay for me to speak up. Like, I'm an expert in my field. Like, people will be like, that's stupid, But some beliefs, you still believe them. Like, I'm not likable. I mean, I know I have some friends, but I still believe it, right? Like, it feels so true to your experience. You're like, I am actually not sure I am likable, right? That does resonate as being true. So here's the belief. And then you can really like explore it. And then what you do is that you like literally, once you find the most core sentence, I believe this because of that. So if this happens, then I feel this way. Like, just one kind of summary. And that when you read it, you should like be able to feel a little bit of like, yeah, that feels true. And you just keep reading it. And if you see it come up like in your real life, like with your child or at work, you kind of like read it and you just notice it. And then when you have proof of the opposite, which you have been noticing all the proof to the opposite, that this is no longer in your present, it's in the past, at some point, your brain will basically do a reset. It will be like software update. This software is no longer relevant. I'm going to update my software. And it literally gets rid of, like the neurological connection in your brain that upholds this belief. Like, it's literally a software update. At least that's the way they describe it. Where somehow when you say you get rid of it, your brain will kind of say you don't need this anymore. And I think and I think that what works about what you did kind of intuitively without necessarily practicing it in that way is that you just really focused on it. You were like, okay, I'm going to really reflect on this. And noticing also the alternative of the reality that you're in, but like really reflected on it. And your brain did the work on its own. We have crazy healing power, but we have to we have to give it its capacity. I think it's a really great modality, because it's just like allows your brain to do the work for you. All you have to do is kind of discover the belief system and then just kind of keep noticing them until your brain is like, that's old. I'm done.
Yeah, I think a hard part of it is, is that a lot of us want that instant, especially in today's world, right? People only like to watch like a 30-second video, let alone, some deep, profound self-reflection and whatnot. And we want, when we don't see those results, we think, oh, maybe it's not working. But in my experience, you do the work, like you're thinking maybe it's not working, but you're going to look future down the road and you're going to look back and you're going to say, wow, I didn't notice it all, but it was changing for me. And, you're going to, like I said, when you wake up and you have that feeling of a burden on you. And like I said, I saw in Kim's eyes, I saw that same, my own eyes in the mirror, and it would change. And next thing you know, you'll be smiling when you wake up. And maybe not every single day. I'm not saying that everything changes. You always have to do some maintenance and, some deeper work, but the changes do happen. And so I encourage anybody listening to this podcast not to give up if things aren't working out exactly the way that you want. And a lot of it is right about changing the direction. If you just change the direction a little bit, you're going the right way and you'll get there when you need to.
Right. You need hope. You need a blueprint. You need a sense of direction of how do you work towards healing? But yeah, healing is possible, and it's a path. So it's not instant, and it's definitely not, all at once, but the journey is great, not always. But what I'm saying is like, it's good to be on the journey. It's awful to be stuck. It is awful to feel stuck. But once you feel like there's movement, it's okay if it's slow sometime. I mean, that this is also shown in the movie. It's like, you work so hard and you feel like you're not progressing enough. And that's part of it too, right? It's those experiences. Yeah. And sometimes there are breakthroughs, but it's not always breakthroughs. Sometimes it's just slow and steady changes. And sometimes it's long period of stagnation. I mean, there's all kinds of ways.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're getting on time, and there's a couple questions in the chat. I'm going to ask the second one first because it's real quick. Jess asked if you could repeat the name of the therapy modality that addresses belief systems.
I think it's called consolidation, something consolidation. I have it somewhere.
Okay, no worries. So I think it's called consolidation therapy. I think you're right.
Yeah, I like
Um,
family system parts work personally, modality wise, and I like consolidation. I think those are the most beneficial for trauma, in terms of trauma informed work. And then I'm a big fan of ketamine supported therapy, like to just give your brain a little bit more space and capacity to actually do the work.
that's yeah, I have an old podcast about that too, so I'll share that with the students. And then I wanted to, before I ask Kirsten's question, because that kind of takes us back as well. I heard you kind of framing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed what I heard was that you framing a big part of your motivation for the documentary is in the sense of you wanted folks to be able to recognize or to look at their own trauma and do their own work. And I thought that was a really cool perspective. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
If,
Yeah, I just think that some trauma is really visible, like physical abuse, sexual abuse, dramatic neglect, um, violence, drug use, etc. Like these are visible. They're, work well in movies. We talk a lot about them, and some of us have experienced that, and we know we've had trauma. But there's a whole world of invisible trauma. And, what was really hard about building the beginning of the movie with Kim is that the trauma that's passing down, what's going on with her children is what's missing, right? It's not that these kids are well fed, they're well dressed, they're going to school, you know, but her kid comes in the room, and as a parent, you want to be like, and this is how each one of us wants to be received, like, hey, baby, like with like excitement and joy, and like we want to be received that way, and then we feel like that we're loved and our worth. And Kim's face is like just, it's like that still face video on YouTube. If you don't know the still face experiment, Google it. It's incredible. But the distress that a little baby feels when her parent is not reacting to her and gives a still face. So Kim has this kind of still face. She can't engage. She has no pleasure in her child. She wants desperately to have pleasure in her children, to give them that, to give them joy, to give them engagement. And mostly she just wants to not deal with them because it's overwhelming for her to be around them. And so I feel like if you're able to see that in the movie, you understand what invisible trauma looks like. This kid, right, is going to grow up and be like, my life was fine, my parents were fine, because they cannot remember. You don't remember what you didn't get. I had a wonderful woman that I interviewed for a podcast, and who passed away, fairly recently, and who's a trauma survivor. She had a pretty heavy dose of trauma. She said that what she learned when she became a parent is that, she always knew what had happened to her. She never realized what she wasn't being given, right? As she's like taking care of a child, and she's like the amount of things that is the lack of versus what's done against. And so I think what I'm hoping with my documentary is that as you observe and you watch, you have time to reflect and to think about what was given to you, what was lacking. And again, not to to feel bad about it, or to, feel to blame. Maybe you can actually have a little bit more compassion for the people in your life that have caused harm to you, but to really understand that a lot of the ways that if you're feeling stuck, likely it's trauma. That's at least what I've discovered. Like if there are areas in your life that you feel stuck, if you start peeling the layers, you'll discover trauma in the core. And doing that peeling of the layer is incredibly worthwhile. It's really, really helpful. The other thing that I think is true is that most of us feel very alone and isolated. We think we're the only one who suck, as parents or as people. And isolation and shame are best buddies. And so when you break the isolation, you can also lift the shame to an extent. So watching kids suffer, developing compassion for her, realizing you're not alone, joining support group, anything that breaks the isolation in your suffering, well, that's why the support group for alcohol, for children of, this and that, like all of the, codependent anonymous, all of those are so positive because you realize you're not alone, and that helps, lift some of the guilt and shame that we carry around, and that keep us down, really. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. Yeah, yeah. More
Yeah.
than so. And it makes me think of, empathy, compassion, kindness towards ourselves and towards parents, whether they're your parents or somebody else's parents or whatever the case may be. But, when I've worked, like I'll go back to those domestic violence offenders and many other people I've worked with over the years. But you talk to them often, not everyone, but oftentimes you talk to an individual about their childhood, which contains a lot of bad things, whatever that may be. And, they'll minimize it oftentimes, and they'll kind of, like, yeah, this happened, but, I shouldn't have acted this way or this way. And, the reality is, no matter what you do as a child, you really don't deserve to have your ass beat or something along those lines, or be verbally, abused. And so they're not compassionate enough towards themselves, about their own experience, and they don't recognize the level of abuse. You can see this in other ways too. Like I work with the adults often, and in especially students, and we're talking about racism or something. So I never experienced any of that, and then you learn more about it, and they're like, well, actually, now that I'm actually looking at it, I didn't realize what it was. And then on the other side, like I said, the parents, we need to be more compassionate, even to our own parents. They came from a different time. They had their own, they went through their own things, and it's I think one of the best things that we can do is kind of, I'm not telling everyone just to let everything go, but to look at everything from empathy and compassion, your own parents, yourself as a parent. Even myself, I had to do that when I've done anything terrible or anything. But like I said, I was falling into these patterns of reactive behavior as a parent. And instead of being, criticizing myself, I've learned to have empathy for myself and look at it as learning experience, as somewhere of a, solution oriented to where I can be a more present, compassionate, kind parent. And so everybody that's listening, I just hope you take care and you have compassion and kindness and care for yourself, for your parents, for yourself as a parent, for yourself as a child. That child still churning in there, have compassion for it. Ask the child what it needs. But I've been ignoring Kirsten, and we were talking about this earlier about why, when we don't value those that are incarcerated, we don't value children, things like that. And so Kirsten takes us back and she asks us, why do you think America does not have family services like other countries? Would it be a disadvantage to some system in America? What's the incentive for basically not having those services compared to some of the other countries we can look at?
I think it's a brilliant question, and I don't think I have the answers. I mean, the U.S. is, like European countries are social democracies, right? They have a social net system that is very old and, developed into the fabric of society. Not only healthcare or family support, free education, but also, unionized labor and a lot of more protection for labor, a lot less just people's wages are livable wages. So this is a country we're a very young country, right? This country is only a few hundred years old, and it is still the Wild West, right? The DNA of this country is one of, I'm going to come and grab some land with a gun and, push out whoever's there or kill them and grab the land. And it's, and it's me and my gun, and I'm going to protect mine. And I just want to be left alone because I was persecuted back home. And the main thing that's of interest to me is that you just leave me alone. And those are, it's not the only thing that the U.S. is, right? This is like this country in the past 400 years is just, I mean, it's so new, it's so vibrant, there's so much going on, and there's so many changes, and we're a country of immigrants, me included. So it's keep changing, but the DNA is the DNA. And so I think that the difficulty in really creating this program, especially at the federal level, right, because it's happening, in some places locally, is because it's not in our DNA. And so you need to transform who we think we are and what's valuable. I mean, there is a very, very big myth in this country around, you can look it up, like the the deserving poor. So the idea that people who are poor are just not deserving it because they're not working hard enough. So it's hard to create services if you think people are not deserving of them. Again, it's the story we tell ourselves, or that we are meritocracy. So if you're doing well, it's because you deserve it. So then why would you be giving your money and paying for others because they're not as deserving? So these stories are affecting our ability to support people and to have a better society, because it would benefit all of us, right? To provide more support to, especially to young children, and to value the early life experience of children. And there are a lot of very cheap programs that have been experimented with that work and really make a difference to early life of children, and who are not being used because there's no funding.
I think I'd just add on to it a little bit more nefarious side of it is I think that without us having to be busy and distracted and struggling all the time, is that you can kind of break free of some of those things. I credit, like, even if I look at my own awakening or disillusionment, I would say, which is ongoing, but I had the space to do so, right? I had kind of elevated myself, and I married someone who also had a good job, and there was just that extra space and basically the freedom to think about those things and to reflect and whatnot. And there's many people out there that don't have the time and capacity for reflection and for that kind of work. And I think where this really hits home when it comes to social work as a profession is that you think about, let's say a master's in social work student, an MSW student. Let's say they take the advanced standing route, meaning they get a skip of the first year of it. Well, they're expected to take 5 graduate classes per semester, plus an internship. And somehow in that time, they're supposed to practice self-care, take care of their family, pay their bills, and all of those things. And we know that that's just not possible. And that's a big critique I have with things like social work, is we're all evidence-based until the evidence is thrown in our face. And we are, like, if you look at it, at most evidence says you should take 2 graduate classes at a time. And that's a lot. I'm taking
And
2.
especially if you're going to be, right, if you're going to be a good therapist, you're going to have to do your own work. There is no good therapist
Yeah.
out there, no good social worker who is not engaged actively in their own healing. I mean, really, I believe that folks who enter the profession and have not done their work are damaging. They're toxic, they're dangerous, and I see them everywhere in the not-for-profit world. So I think that not having the space to do this work is actually dangerous. The fact that you're expecting people to join this profession without having had any time to actually self-reflect and do the work is it's bad. It's bad education.
Yeah, and it goes into after you leave school, because, let's say you didn't have the time to do the work, or you didn't do it for whatever reason, and then you're in the profession, and, you probably got to pay off your student loans, you got to take care of your family. And so they're advertising clinical therapist jobs, and they're offering like $100,000, but then you look at them and what they want you to see is like 80 clients a week. Well, how are you supposed to pay attention to yourself, first of all, and give yourself the attention you need if you're working 80 hours a week? But how can you see 80 people and give them the attention they need?
No, it's ridiculous. It's a travesty.
Yeah,
It's a travesty, and a lot of these places are quite abusive of the social workers. It's really sad that these health clinics treat their own people that way. It's like again, it's like toxic environment, toxic system, and we're trying to educate children, because that's true for schools too, right? It's true for so many of these environments. The people that work there are not treated well. They're not happy, and then they're supposed to be educating children or helping people or healing people. It's a travesty.
Yeah, you most definitely can't help other people heal if you don't have the time to heal
No,
yourself. And, that's an ongoing process. So that means like forever.
true.
And from my perspective. Well, yeah, it's been great chatting with you, Anna. I've learned a lot. I thank you for the documentary as well. It was a pleasure to watch. And I hope that for my students that haven't watched it, that they will watch it in the coming week. And anybody else that hasn't. And, I just encourage everybody to think about what we've talked about, and to, realize that you can make a change in yourself and your family and beyond. And have kindness and compassion towards yourself, like I said, towards yourself, towards your children, towards your parents, toward the child in you, toward the parent in you, whatever it may be. But most of all, I just want to thank you for taking, I know you're a busy woman, and taking the time out of your day, to chat with me, to chat with my audience. And, just a big thank you from the bottom of my heart, not just for that, but for the work that you do. You know, everyone out there is not doing this kind of work, especially in like the reflective sense. And so just a big shout out to you for the revolutionary social work that you do. The world is a better place because of the work that you do. So big thank you from my heart to yours.
Thank you so much for saying those words. It's always hard to see your own value and your own impact. So I really appreciate your words. And it was a pleasure talking to you today. And I thank you for the work that you're doing, both as a dad, as partner, and as a professor, and in this podcast, which resonates with the work I'm doing. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, anytime. And hopefully we can connect again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Christian.
All right, Anna, take care. Have a great day.
Bye.